Welcome to a KeySmash Studios tutorial. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create levitate functionality, so that way whenever we use the raycast that we created in a previous video and hit an object, we can take that object and move it up into the air. As you're watching, if you find this video helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. So as I mentioned in a previous video, we did raycasting, which I will link in the description below. And the way that we raycast is with our left mouse button. And then also when we use that left mouse button, whenever we hit an object, we duplicate that object. And so I need a way to separate that duplication from our levitation. And so the way we're going to do that is by going to our project settings, going down to our input, and adding a new action mapping. And I'm going to call this levitate. And then I'm going to bind it to my control, both my left and my right. And then now we can go ahead and open up our code and create this functionality. I'm going to be adding this code to my character controller. You don't need our specific character controller. The only code that you will need that we're not doing in this tutorial is raycasting code, which again, I will link in the description below. So now we're going to go ahead and start in our header, and we're going to need to add an include. And this include is going to be for our mesh components. So we're going to do components / static mesh component .h. And this is so that way we can turn on and off the gravity on our mesh. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and add our functions. So if you did our telekinesis tutorial, this tutorial is going to feel somewhat similar until we get down to that levitate function. So just like we did in that one, we're going to create a void function, and this one's going to be called switch control. And then our next one is also going to be a void function, and this one we will call levitate. And then we're going to need two properties for this one. So we're going to need a boolean, and we're going to call this holding control. And we're going to use this to determine if the player has raycast, were they holding control while doing it, so that way we know if the player is trying to levitate this object. And then the other thing we're going to need is a uStatic mesh component. We're going to need reference to the target's mesh, so that way we can turn the gravity back on after a player has let go of the control button. If you didn't follow the levitate tutorial, you're also going to want to add an A-actor target, so that way you can hold reference to the target object that you've hit with the raycast. And now we're done with the header, so we can go over to our CPP, and we're going to go up to our constructor, and here we're going to give a default to our holding control, and just make it equal false, as the player isn't holding control when the game starts. And now we're going to go down to our tick. And as you can see, we have the stuff from our telekinesis tutorial right here, but I'm just going to go ahead and erase that and we'll rewrite it. So I'm going to start off with making sure that there is a target. If there's no target, in other words, I haven't hit anything with my raycast, it doesn't matter whether I'm holding control or not, because there's nothing the player has said that they want to levitate. So now that we've made sure that there is a target, we can go ahead and check those player inputs. So we're going to add the telekinesis functionality back just real quick. So we'll just say if holding shift. Then we'll go ahead and call that telekinesis function. And then now we want an else if for our levitation. And for this, it's holding control. And it's going to be the same general thing, except here we'll call levitate. So if you didn't do the telekinesis tutorial, you'll just have an if holding control, then levitate. Now we can go ahead and add our inputs. So this is going to look pretty much the same as our telekinesis one. So input component, bind action, and the mapping that we're wanting to bind is levitate. We're wanting to bind it to the action of pressed for this actor, and then the function that we're wanting to bind is myCharacter switch control. And then I'm just going to copy this line and paste it, and then we're going to change it to released. And all these two lines are doing is saying whenever I press or release the mapping of levitate, which we've bound to our control button, then call the switch control function. So now we can go ahead and create that switch control function. So void switch control. And then in here, what we're wanting to do is say whatever our Boolean currently is, we want to switch it to the opposite of that. So the first time we press down, our holding control is going to be false, but now we're pressing our control, so we want it to become true. And then once we release that control button, we want to call switch control again, and then switch it from the true that it currently is back to false. So the simple way of doing that is by doing holding control equals the opposite of what currently is holding control. And then we need to add a my character so that error goes away. And then the next thing we want to do is see if this function was called when we released our control. So if not holding control, then we want to actually check if our mesh exists. And the reason we're doing this is because whenever we raycast and hit an object, we're going to save a reference to that mesh, and that mesh is how we can turn on and off the gravity. So if we've released control, we want to make sure that there actually is a reference to that mesh. And if there is a reference to that mesh, in other words, there was once a target, then we're going to go ahead and take that mesh, and we're going to call set simulate physics, and we're going to set that to true. And what this is saying is once I have released the mesh that I was levitating, we can turn the physics back on so that way it will fall back to the ground. And then now that we've done that, we want to set our mesh to null as we've released it and we no longer want to be moving this mesh. And we can set our target to null as well, as again, we're releasing it if we've let go of control and we no longer want to levitate this object. And now that our switch control function is done, we can go down to our raycast. And what we're wanting to do here is just add a else if section for if we're holding control. So our raycast is called again when we hit that left mouse button, and whenever we do hit that left mouse button, we're wanting to check what other inputs our player is getting, so that way we can determine the action they're wanting to take. And so if we're wanting to levitate the object, then we're wanting the player to be holding control, and if they are holding control after they've raycast and hit an object, we want to go ahead and save a reference to the object that they've hit. So the way we do that is by doing target equals hit.getActor. And we also want to save reference to the mesh, as this allows us to turn the gravity back on once we're done manipulating the object. So we'll do mesh equals target find component by class, and the component we're wanting to find is a uStaticMesh component. And then after we've saved that reference, we can go ahead and take that mesh and set simulate physics to false. This turns the physics off so that way we can move the object up into the air, making a levitate functionality. And that's all we're going to be changing for our ray function. So now we can go ahead and actually create our levitate function. So void a my character, levitate. And then inside this function, we're just wanting to do three things. We're wanting to get the current location of the actor. We're wanting to take that Z value of the location and add to it. And then we want to set the actor's new location to that adjusted vector. So to start, we want to get an F vector. That's going to be our position. And we're going to make it equal to the target's getActor location. And then from there, we're going to take that position, we're going to get the X value of it, and then we're going to plus equals some arbitrary number, which I'm going to choose as 5. Whatever you set this number to is how quickly this object is going to move. Again, we called levitate inside of tick, so it is called every frame, so we're moving it up by 5 in the X direction each frame. And then we can go ahead and actually move this target, so target set relative location, and then it's going to take in that position vector that we've adjusted. And that's all the code we're doing for this tutorial, so we can go ahead and go back to our scene and compile. And now that our compile is complete, we're going to go ahead and drag an empty actor into the scene. We're going to add a static mesh component to this actor. I'm going to give it a mesh of cube. And then you want to make sure that you take this static mesh and have it be your root component. And then you also want to make sure that you check simulate physics. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and test and play. So if you look over towards your object and hold down Control and then click your left mouse button, it moves up into the air, and when you release Control, it falls back down. And then depending on how fast you're wanting it to go up, you change that number that we added to the Z position of our object. So as a recap, we created a new action mapping for our control, so that way when our player holds it down and shoots a raycast, we know that they're wanting to levitate the new target object. The way we levitate the object is by each frame, we take in the current object's position, add to it some number in the Z direction, and then do this every frame, so that way it gives the appearance of levitating in the upwards direction. We also use simulate physics of the mesh, so that way we can move it up, and then whenever we release it, turn that physics back on and it'll fall back to the ground. As always, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you can join our Discord and ask them there. We make videos here every Wednesday and Saturday, but we also stream on Twitch every Tuesday and Wednesday. We also have a game on the Google Play Store called Blast Off, and we have a Unity asset pack of kids' toys. And we have a Patreon. If you would like to support us in any of those ways, everything will be linked in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.